But yeah, I'm wondering, Chris, if you could kind of tell us a story. Tell us a story of
Yeah.
maybe the early internet as we explore these
Yeah.
verbs, read, write, web. And what I like about this is your framing of this. It's in the beginning, there was the internet, and the internet was good, right?
Yeah.
There's this sense of a paradise lost, that we
Yeah.
had something
That's
special in
right.
the early days, and it got sidetracked. So maybe you could start us off there. Tell
Yeah.
us the story of the early internet. Like,
Yeah.
what was different?
Well, I mean, so, and I go through this some, in a pretty rapid, but I think, hopefully helpful way in the book. But the internet had its origins in government and academia, and for a variety of reasons, it began as this open, decentralized platform, right? So anyone could go and, for example, put up a website, and you could create art or make a game or start a business. And the key feature was you owned that website, and you had a direct relationship with your audience, right? So if people came to your website, you could make it free and just a cool thing, or you could put ads up, or you could, sell stuff. And by the way, Jeff Bezos decided to sell stuff. Larry Page decided to put up ads. Like, this is why all this stuff happened, right? Like the 90s happened, and this sort of golden age of innovation on the internet, 90s and early 2000s, because these entrepreneurs knew you could put something up, and if you built it, you owned it. Like, you didn't pay 30% to Apple. You didn't pay 100% to Facebook. Like, if you fast forward to the platforms today, like, it's very, very different now. Like, back then you had true ownership. You owned it. You controlled it. Like, yeah, you could lose your website if you broke the law or did other kind of really bad things, but otherwise, like, you had this little plot of land, right? You owned something. And it was this collective bottoms up. I kind of liken it in the book to a city, of like this sort of organically growing city. I'm in New York right now. Like, I love New York, and I love how it's so organic and it's bottom up, and people have little plots of land, and there's parks, and there's public space and private space, and they interact together. And that's what the early internet was like. And look, that's why I got into it personally. Like, I was also reflecting on this as I was writing the book. Like, I don't know if I would have been in business, honestly. I'm not sort of naturally a business person. I was in academia. I was in a PhD program. I got into the internet because I got into business, into tech, honestly, because of the internet and these ideals. Like, I was like, this is amazing, right? That you could sort of unite all of humanity in this global information network in this way that's sort of this owned by everybody. There was no company behind it. There was no one controlling it. By the way, that wasn't a fait accompli for those who really dig into the history. There were companies that were trying to own it, like Microsoft and Disney and others. But thank God for the kind of open source folks and the open protocol people who won out on that. Anyways, fast forward today, and the internet has essentially, if you look at all this by all the stats, has gotten consolidated around roughly 5 companies. So, this is Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google, et cetera. It's the top. I think it's 95% of searches are the top 1% of search engines, top 1% of social networks, and 95% of the traffic. The 50% of Nasdaq's market cap is those top 5 companies, up from 25% a decade ago. Across the board, you look at all the stats: traffic, money. The top 5 social networks made $150 billion last year in revenue. That was 95% of the revenue made in social networking. So it's just across the board. We are very close to a situation where the internet went from this open, permissionless, democratically owned system to something that looks more like old style broadcast TV, where you have ABC, CBS, and NBC, which I think is a very disappointing outcome. And in fact, I would go so far as to say I consider, like, a lot of the work I've done on the internet, honestly, a kind of a failure if that's where we end up. Like, this is a very disappointing outcome. And I don't, and if I thought it was, and so then what do you do about it? You could imagine doing regulatory things about it. And in theory, that's great. I don't see any actual plausible movement towards that. Simple stuff like the Apple App Store, which is clearly, a huge issue for startups and clearly, I think, an abuse of monopoly power.
Are you following, by the way, that Epic versus
Yeah. I
Apple
mean,
battle right
yeah,
now?
and Epic basically lost the thing. Now Apple's doing this very cynical
And it's
workaround.
because, so for folks who don't know, it's because Epic just wanted to deploy a Fortnite,
Yeah.
like a payment system inside Fortnite. And Apple's like, nah, you can't. It has to go
Yeah.
through our Apple payment system, and we get 30% commission on those
Like,
transactions.
like I
Right?
don't think, like, my partner Mark Andreessen says he doesn't think he could launch Netscape today, right? You couldn't imagine if you launched an app that said you can open any other app in the world, including all sorts of crazy stuff. Like, that just would clearly be outside of the bounds. So, like, we've dramatically narrowed the kind of Overton window of innovation because of Apple's policies. Anyways, that's a separate topic. But, like, look, theoretically, this problem I'm describing of, like, sort of this this strong consolidation of the internet. Theoretically, there are regulatory solutions to it. People have proposals like data portability and other things. I haven't seen any serious efforts towards those things. And as we see it with the Apple response yesterday, these companies are very clever and able to work around these kinds of regulatory things. I'm not optimistic about that approach. The other approach is new technologies, right? And I think that the only credible and by far the most important one are blockchains and the networks built on top. And so, that to me is sort of the broad motivation here: is can we build new systems, new social networks, new games, new financial systems, new, just across the board, every kind of internet service you can imagine. Can we build new ones that are able to compete with these, what I call corporate networks, the Facebooks, Twitters, et cetera, but have the societal benefits that we saw on the early internet. And that's what I see as the promise of blockchains.
To continue leveling up your crypto game, then you need to get on the Bankless newsletter. It's the world's most popular crypto email and is completely free. Just click below to sign up.